Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto become Ben the Fox Sin of Greed and got Harem? Part 1. Huge shout out to Tachyon99 for this story. If you want more awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. 15 years have passed since the Kyuubi attacked Konoha. In the Uzumaki training grounds, a 13-year-old girl with long blood red hair that reaches her lower back and deep purple eyes, is currently trying to use what look like 4 purplish chains with kunai-like endings that are coming out of her back. Watching the little girl were 2 women. One looked like an older version of the little girl with blood red hair that went down to her mid-back, deep violet eyes, and a happy smile. The other woman, however, looked slightly strange. She also had blood red hair that went down to her upper rear, red slitted eyes, and whisker marks on her cheeks, while also having a happy smile. However, what made her look strange were the fox ears on top of her head and the 9 swishing tails behind her, that all were covered in orange-red fur with black tips. "Mom! Kurami! Look, I almost got it!" The girl squealed while jumping up and down in excitement, which caused her to lose focus, making the chains dissipate back into chakra, causing the girl to pout and the 2 women to laugh at her antics. "That was very good, Naruto," Kushina told the now-named Naruto. "But next time, keep your focus and keep practicing so that you can eventually summon and use them like it's second nature," she said, while summoning her own chains, which mostly waved lazily swayed behind her except for one that went and picked up her daughter, bringing her closer to her before giving her daughter a hug, after dissipating the chains. "It also helps make them easier to control, so that you don't accidentally hurt someone," Kushina said, letting go of her daughter and seeing her nod her head up and down. "I will. I'm just excited about almost having them down so that I can be stronger as a kunoichi," Naruto said with a big, bright smile on her face, before it turned into a sad frown. "I also miss Naruto and I," muttered Naruto sadly, getting Kushina and Kurami to also frown sadly. Kushina and Kurami knew who she was talking about, and they missed him too. Kurami moved towards Naruto and got on one knee, so that she became level with Naruto's height, and said, "Don't worry about your brother. He's still doing fine, and I know this because I can still feel my chakra inside of him, meaning he is still alive," Kurami said with a smile, getting Kushina to smile at her friend for cheering up her daughter. "Besides, we all know it wasn't his choice to leave the village," Kurami growled, getting angry looks from Kushina and Naruto as well, both knowing whose fault it was that Naruto wasn't there with them. Flashback, 1 year ago, midnight. "What do you mean I'm being banished?" shouted a slightly deep, rough voice that indicated it belonged to a teenage boy. Said boy was a 14-year-old boy that untamed, spiky, silverish blue hair, and red eyes that had a touch of violet to them. He was wearing a closed black vest that had trimmings the same color as his eyes with white fastenings, black shinobi pants with lines going down the sides of his pants in the same color as his eyes as well, bandages wrapped around his right thigh that held a ninja pouch in place, with another on his right hip behind him. Finishing off his look were a pair of black shinobi sandals, fingerless, black, leather gloves with metal plating on the back of the hand, and a headband with a strange leaf design wrapped around his right arm. However, currently, he was face down on the floor, with his hands being restrained behind his back by an ANBU with gray, gravity-defying hair, with the mask of dog. This was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. And he was currently being banished by none other than his father, Minato Namikaze, who looked at him with a cold look in his eyes. Minato Namikaze, the Yandai Hokage, looked at his son before replying, "You are being banished because you were found guilty for the death of your teammates and Jounin-sensei on your last mission and for stealing money from the Konoha reserves," Minato said without an ounce of remorse. Naruto grew furious at these accusations. "That's bullshit. They attacked me because they wanted to rape some of the women we rescued on the mission, and I refused and threatened to report them, and I have never stolen anything from the reserves. I don't even have the clearance to get to the vault, or know anyone who does," Naruto shouted, enraged at such ridiculous claims. "You will watch your tone when speaking to your Hokage and father," Minato roared, furious at how this demon was speaking to him. "You're not my father," Naruto shouted back. "You've never treated me like a son, and clearly you must be getting old if you can't remember that since I'm being banished, that means you're no longer my Hokage, which means I don't have to listen to you anymore." Minato sneered at Naruto, before schooling his expression but keeping his cold eyes trained on Naruto. It matters not. You have 1 hour to gather your things and leave the village. Naruto glared at Minato, before Inu let him go, which let Naruto get up, rubbing his wrist from being held for so long, and took off his headband. But instead of handing it over to the Hokage, he crushed it in his hand, showing his physical strength, and dropped it on the ground, which made Minato angry, as that was basically a way to say, "Funk you," to the village. With that, Naruto left, not seeing the looks of sadness that appeared on the faces of 7 women, 3 of which could not be seen due to the masks they wore, and 1 of which belonged to his mother. Naruto had his stuff all packed in scrolls with a backpack and was jogging towards the main gate to leave, when he saw 3 of his best friends waiting for him by the gate. Naruto slowed down and looked at the 3 girls before him. One had black hair that they kept in 2 buns, making them look like panda ears, and gray eyes. She was wearing a pink long-sleeve pajama blouse with red trimmings and yellow buttons, pink pajama pants and blue shinobi sandals. The other had long brown hair that was kept in a ponytail with 2 strands of hair framing her face, large black eyes, and a set of fawn tattoos on her cheeks, signifying that she comes from the Inuzuka clan. She was wearing form-fitting gray short that end at her mid-thighs, black shinobi sandals, and short-sleeved jacket that she has partially unzipped, showing that she was wearing a white t-shirt underneath. And at her feet were 3 gray furred dogs with white furred bellies that reached to her knees. The third had short, dark blue hair that was cut in a Harem style with 2 strands framing her face, and a pair of pale, pupilless eyes that have tinges of lavender in them, signifying that she comes from the Hyuga. She is currently wearing lavender-colored pajama pants, blue shinobi sandals, and a cream-colored jacket that has fur lining the cuffs and bottom of the jacket. These 3 were Tenten Higurashi, Hana Inuzuka, and Hinata Hyuga, 3 of Naruto's best friends. 2 things that all 3 had in common were that they had tears in their eyes, and they all had matching necklaces that were pieces of aquamarine carved into the shape of a fox that matched up with many other women's and girls' necklaces in the village. A.N. Bansin tattoo. Naruto looked at them with sad eyes, before saying, "Hey you 3, started Naruto, what are you guys doing here?" The 3 started crying before they launched themselves at him, hugging him, while crying and saying, "We don't want you to go," over and over. Naruto sighed, knowing what they wanted, but he knew that he couldn't stay much longer or else the ANBU will execute him on the spot. "I'm sorry you 3, but I can't stay, or else I'll be executed by the ANBU," Naruto said, getting the 3 to let go and look at him. "Then we'll go with you," shouted Hana, not wanting to be separated from Naruto, along with the other 2, who were nodding their heads looking at him with hope in their eyes. But that hope disappeared when he shook his head, denying their request. "You can't do that, you guys have family, friends, and responsibilities who love you and need you here," Naruto said with a small, soft smile before looking over at Hana. "Who's going to help the animals and take care of your mom, Hana?" Naruto asked, making Hana look down with a sad look. "Or what about your dad and his shop, Tenten? Who's going to help him with all of that?" Naruto asked Tenten, making her also look down with shut eyes. "And what about your mom and sister, Hinata? Who's going to help Hitomi or your sister?" Naruto asked, causing Hinata to let her tears flow again. "I know you guys want to come with me, but you have to stay here and help your families," Naruto explained. "And besides, I'm banished and only the Hokage can change that, and I highly doubt he will," Naruto said, angry at Minato for being such a rotten bastard of a father, and even worse Hokage. His words though made them realize, what if there was a different Hokage? They could call him back. "We'll find someone to become Hokage, and if not, then one of us will, in order to bring you back," the 3 of them shouted, surprising Naruto with their conviction before he smiled a real and true smile that made them all blush. In that case, Naruto began with shadowed eyes, making the 3 wonder what he was going to do. Before he surprised them by kissing each of them deeply on the lips with such passion, it made their knees weak. Afterwards he smiled at each of them, and said, "Let that show that we will always be together, no matter where I am, and as a promise for the 4 of us to meet again, someday." They all smiled before he turned around, and began jogging towards the gate before running out into the world. The 4 never saw Kushina and Naruto standing on a building, watching the 4, while gripping their own necklaces. Flashback. And as the 3 remembered what happened last year, they grew even more determined to find out where he is, because a lot had changed over the past year. Before they could continue down this train of thought, they heard two people walking over to the group and they turned to see two women standing before them. One was a tall, blonde woman with beautiful, brown eyes. She was wearing a gray, sleeveless, kimono-style blouse held closed by a broad, dark bluish-gray obi that matches her pants, black-heeled shoes, with a green haori over that with kanji for gamble on the back. Her blouse may be closed, but it still shows a considerable amount of her J-cup bust. The other woman is of average height, with shoulder-length black hair and onyx-colored eyes. She was wearing a bluish-black kimono with white trimmings held closed by a light purple obi that still shows she is wearing a mesh armor shirt underneath with black, open-toed sandals with low heels. These two are Tsunade Senju, the Gondai Hokage, and Shizune Kato, her apprentice and personal aide. One thing that can be easily noticed are a pair of necklaces that they were wearing around their necks, however they couldn't see the charm. 2 months after Naruto's banishment, Kushina tracked down her old sensei, Tsunade Senju, and requested for her to come back and become the Hokage. At first, Tsunade refused, saying it was a fool's job, until she heard Kushina begin to beg for her to come back and help her get her son back. This stunned Tsunade because in all of the time that she had known and taught Kushina, Tsunade had never seen her former student beg. Tsunade, after getting Kushina to calm down, found out the reason why Kushina was asking for help to get her son back was her ex-husband, the current Hokage, had banished him for false charges and was one of those bigoted people who didn't see Naruto for himself. After that, Tsunade agreed to come back but explained that unless Minato was forced to step down or chose to, she wouldn't be able to help. Kushina told Tsunade that she had that part handled. Eventually, Minato was arrested by ANBU and publicly executed along with the old advisors, after it was discovered that Minato had banished his son on false charges without evidence, knew about Danzo's stealing of children from clans for his root and for allowing the civilian council to commit crimes and then get away scot-free by paying him some money. Once that was done, Tsunade was inaugurated as the Gondai Hokage, and she set about all kinds of changes, like the execution of the corrupt members of the civilian council and the hiring of the new civilian council. She also took back all of the money that was stolen from the Konoha reserves, which turned out to be the amount that Naruto was charged for, and put it back in the Konoha reserves, and the rest of the assets were given as payment to all of the necessary sections in Konoha. This was 3 months after Naruto was banished. "What are you three doing?" asked Tsunade, with Shizune sharing a curious look. "We were training and then talking about Naruto, and how much we miss him," Kushina replied, getting sad looks from both Tsunade and Shizune. Tsunade because she wasn't around to meet or try and help her godson, and Shizune because she would have very much liked to meet Naruto. "Don't worry, I still have the scroll with the recall message ready for when you find him. Just keep looking and I know he'll turn up eventually," encouraged Tsunade, getting huge smiles from all of them. Kurami then realized something. "Hey, what charms do you have on those necklaces of yours?" This brought the attention of Kushina and Naruto onto Tsunade and Shizune, who both looked surprised by the sudden question, but they pulled them out and showed the charm. When they saw the charm, the Kushina, Naruto, and Kurami were all shocked to see 2 aquamarine fox charms. This shocked the 3 because they knew that only Naruto makes those charms and he hadn't been seen in over a year. And they remembered Tsunade and Shizune wearing those necklaces when they came back to the village. Kushina shakily asked, "Where did you get those?" Naruto and Kurami were looking at Tsunade and Shizune intensely, awaiting their answer. Tsunade and Shizune were confused by these reactions, but Tsunade decided to answer, "We got them a year ago from a 14-year-old boy." Tsunade answered, then asked curiously, "What did he look like?" Naruto asked. "He was 5 feet 7 inches with wild silverish blue hair that extended past his shoulders with bangs beginning to grow over his face, crimson eyes with a tinge of violet, wearing a gray muscle shirt and black pants with black combat boots." "Why do you ask?" Tsunade asked after describing what the boy looked like. It was then Tsunade and Shizune's turns to be shocked when they saw Naruto and Kushina pull out their necklaces that were exact replicas to their own. "We're asking because you just described Naruto," Kushina replied, "and also because only he knew how to make those necklaces. Anyone who tried to make them failed and the necklace was either broken or misshapen." "How long ago was this?" Naruto asked, hoping for a trail on her brother. "It was about 2 weeks before you came to me, Kushina. He had met us and we all started talking when my debt collectors found us and tried to get me to pay." He then asked if they play a game, where if he won, they would forget the debts, and if they won, he would take the debts on himself. He won, and then actually made a bet for my family necklace, and when he heard me say it was cursed, he simply laughed and said his luck would be stronger than some stupid curse. He saw how much it meant to me and he then gave us both these necklaces. Tsunade replied, feeling shocked at unknowingly meeting her godson who helped her with her debts. Kushina, Naruto, and Kurami all had smiles knowing that he was okay. However, before they could celebrate his safety, Inbu Nico appeared with a stack of papers and a small black book. Hokage-sama, I have brought the latest edition of the bingo book, as well as some wanted posters, informed Nico, revealing that this was a woman. Thank you for the bingo book, but why the wanted posters? Asked Tsunade politely, after taking the bingo book and posters, curious about why they are there. The wanted posters come from the continent of Britannia and are the members of the group known as the Seven Deadly Sins, replied Nico, earning intrigued looks at the name of the group and shocked that they received wanted posters from Britannia. You see, it was over the past year that Britannia was discovered by the elemental nations far across the ocean. Travel took a week to get to Britannia, but they made it and established trade routes through Nami no Kuni in order to get items such as cloth, food, and sometimes bounties in return for copies of the bingo books. Thank you for this information, Nico, thanked Tsunade to Nico, who nodded her head and was preparing to return to her post when, before you leave, can you tell me why this group is called the Seven Deadly Sins? Tsunade asked, curious about the group's name as well as the other four present. Nico nodded and said, of course, Hokage-sama. Apparently, the reason they are called the Seven Deadly Sins is because they are 7 of the most brutal criminals in Britannia who carved symbols of 7 beasts onto their bodies. They are the dragon's sin of wrath, Meliodas; the serpent's sin of envy, Diane; the grizzly's sin of sloth, King; the goat's sin of lust, Gauther; the lion's sin of pride, Escaner; the boar's sin of gluttony, Merlin; and the fox's sin of greed, Ban. These 7 were the most brutal of criminals who were eventually brought on as the strongest and cruelest chivalric order of knights in the kingdom. However, apparently they betrayed the kingdom by murdering the great holy knight, Zaratras. Tsunade heard the wording of the final sentence describing their crime. Apparently? Asked Tsunade with a raised eyebrow. Nico nodded, yes, apparently, because it has been discovered by some spies that we have in the kingdom that the holy knights are not as holy as they appear. They have a secret history of performing crimes, such as raiding, pillaging, and rape, all while stating that they have the power to do so, simply because they are holy knights with only a select few being honorable. Nico informed, while sounded venomous at the end when talking about the holy knights. The others were no better, as they too were furious at how these so-called knights acted simply because they had power. Tsunade calmed down and asked, thank you, when was it that the Sins apparently betrayed their kingdom? It was about 7 years ago, when the death of the great holy knight and the framing of the 7 deadly sins took place. After the event, they scattered all over Britannia and they have not been heard from except for Ban, who is being held in a prison that is the same as the lowest level of a blood prison, Nico informed, which received looks of surprise, shock, and horror. But Nico continued, however, he wasn't arrested, he simply walked in and turned himself over while saying, it might be fun to experience prison here. Before they locked him up in a room while pinning him to the wall with steel spikes piercing through his limbs, holding him with a curved, double-ended spike holding his mouth shut. Nico informed, causing the looks of horror to increase in severity at the cruel punishment. How can they do something like that? And why would he say it would be fun? Asked a shaking Naruto, with Tsunade, Shizune, Kushina, and Kurami looking to be thinking the same questions. Nico understood their reactions, for she had reacted much the same when she heard this information. Nico then decided to inform them of some information that had also surprised her when she heard it. Do not be alarmed just yet. Another epithet Ban goes by is Undead Ban, because he has proven to take any punishment, no matter how severe and fatal the wound. He always comes back looking just as fine as before he received the injury. He never dies, and when he does, he comes back looking just as alive as before. Nico informed, which instantly changed all of their looks from horror to surprise, amazement, and intrigue at how such a feat was possible. Nico then said something that surprised them all. It has also been said that the 7 deadly sins Ban knows the location of a certain someone that I am sure will shock all of you. Nico said cryptically, getting the group to focus on her again. Who? Asked Kurami, curious about who Nico could be talking about along with the others. Nico looked at Kushina and Naruto and said, apparently, he knows the last location of your son and brother, Naruto. Naruto and Kushina went wide-eyed at that along with the others and shouted, he knows where Naruto was last. I have no guarantee, said Nico while shaking her head, but it could be possible to ask, and see if it's true because apparently, he based his looks off of Naruto. Tsunade nodded her head at the idea before, that is an excellent idea. Tsunade exclaimed, before turning to Kushina, we will send a group to Britannia in search of Ban, and should they meet one of the other sins, they will ask if they can assist in searching for Ban. The group nodded in excitement, before Tsunade said, but not right now. Why not? Asked Naruto and Kushina, showing that even though one is a full-grown woman in Jounin, they can still be childish. Tsunade shook her head at their antics. Because right now you aren't strong enough, Naruto. I know you want to go and see Britannia and find your brother, but right now you need to keep training to get stronger. So how about this? Tsunade explained, if you can get stronger and keep training, I'll let you go with the group in 3 years because that is when I will send them in search of this Ban. Naruto thought about the deal. It had always been a dream to see Britannia when she heard about a continent far across the ocean. She thought about it and realized that it was the best she would get. If she got stronger, she could better protect herself, and when she finds her brother, she could show that she can stand by his side as an equal. She looked at Tsunade with a fierce look of determination in her eyes and nodded her before she looked at Kushina and said, Ka-san, let's get back to training. Tsunade and Kushina both looked on in pride at her sudden attitude, and both knew that no matter what came she would go far in the future. Naruto looked at her necklace one more time, before she closed her eyes and thought, I will see you again someday, Naruto and I. The next day, the entire village was gathered in front of the Hokage Tower waiting, because they had received a message saying an announcement would be taking place. The whole village waited, wondering and chatting amongst themselves about what the announcement could be. They didn't have to wait much longer as soon they all saw Tsunade and quieted down when she raised her asking for silence to speak. I know all of you are wondering what this announcement is going to be about, and I will tell you. I have decided that in 3 years' time, we will send a group of ninja to the continent of Britannia. Tsunade announced, which shocked everyone and caused them to start talking amongst themselves about why she would do such a thing. Tsunade let them talk for a minute before raising her hand again, getting everyone's attention and quieting them down. I know that this seems strange and sudden, but there is a reason for this. We have recently obtained information about the last known location of Clan Heir, Naruto Uzumaki. Announced Tsunade, who was met with stunned silence from the village at the possible location of one of their heroes. You see, when Minato was arrested and executed along with the corrupt council, Tsunade set the record straight about how Naruto was just like Naruto and was a Jinchuriki that helped keep the village safe by holding half of the Kyuubi, and that should he have died all those years ago due to the village's abuse, then they would have unleashed the Kyuubi onto themselves. This information shocked the entire village that they had been mistreating one of their heroes. Once this was known, all of the villagers, who took part in Naruto's abuse growing up, paid repercussions to Kushina and returned all of the extra money they took from him. The shinobi who took part were given the choice to be executed and have all of their assets seized and given to Kushina and the Uzumaki clan, or be placed on 1-year probation of no work and no paid leave. Public apologies to Kushina for the mistreatment to her clansmen and son, go to Inoichi for therapy and to see if they are fit to continue as shinobi for Konoha, and finally, they had to undergo any punishment assigned by Kushina. Kushina knew it wasn't their fault that they were misled, and decided that when Naruto returns, they will serve Naruto however he wishes, and will not complain. The shinobi agreed wholeheartedly, knowing that whatever gave them this second chance, they would not waste it. Tsunade then decided to continue. You see, early yesterday, I had received my new copy of the bingo book along with 7 wanted posters from Britannia of 7 people who all together make up the group known as the 7 Deadly Sins. This received reactions of curiosity on why this would be important. Tsunade then explained, this is significant because the sin known as Ban was the last person to ever see Naruto, and so the group will go to Britannia in order to seek him out and ask about Naruto's location. Tsunade finished, which got everyone to understand now why she mentioned the group known as the 7 Deadly Sins. Tsunade then added, I will be deciding the group a month before the designated day that the group will leave in search of Ban, This got many of the shinobi excited at possibly getting a chance to find Naruto and see Britannia. But then Tsunade said, however, only a group of 6 to 8 shinobi will leave to Britannia in search of Ban. Therefore, if you wish to join the group, you must have a valid reason for wanting to join, otherwise your request will be denied. This got many of the shinobi to drop their heads, knowing that they didn't know Naruto well enough to give a good reason. However, among the shinobi present, a group of women and girls knew exactly why they wanted to be the ones that go to Britannia. These women all looked different, and all had different jobs. However, something that they, along with many others, had in common are the necklaces that all share the same charm, a hand-carved aquamarine stone in the shape of a fox. Meanwhile, at Britannia, in Britannia, near a town called Dalmari Town, there is a prison called Base Dungeon. Inside the dungeon is a cell that is guarded by 2 guards, who are talking about what food to eat later. Inside the cell, however, is a prisoner, who is being held by 11 steel spikes that were pierced through his limbs with another curved, double-ended spike being held where his mouth is, in order to prevent him from talking. He was 6 feet 11 inches and was currently shirtless with only unbuttoned, purple pants with metal studs covering his lower half. He had long silverish blue hair and matching facial hair that had started growing out. He had spikes in his shoulders, his forearms, and an extra spike in his right bicep, spikes in his thighs, shins, and feet. All of these spikes pierced all the way through his limbs into the wall behind him, and ended with big loops, in order to prevent him from sliding forward to escape, with some of the spikes having bits of chains connected to the hoops. On the left side of his abdominals, his has the tattoo of a red fox looking over its shoulder with a mark that looks like a circle with 8 lines of different lengths extending from it. A.N. Regular fox sin of greed symbol. This was Ban Fox, the 7 deadly sins, Fox's sin of greed, and he was currently sleeping. Now normally, one would be in immense pain from this form of imprisonment, but Ban didn't care and just continued to sleep through this. Suddenly, he began to stir and opened his eyes, revealing crimson-red eyes that had a tinge of violet to them that looked around in curiosity before he began humming a random tune while thinking, I wonder what the others are up to, and how everyone is back home? They probably forgot all about me these past several years. Time skip 3 years. It has been 3 years since Konoha found out on a possible lead to Naruto's location. Over the last 3 years, Naruto trained with all her might in order to become stronger, so that she would be able to leave with the group to Britannia. Going along with Naruto were her mother Kushina, her teachers Anko Mitarashi, Kurina Yuhi, and Hana Inuzuka, her best friends Hinata Hyuga, Tenten Higurashi, and Satsuki Uchiha, with the latter of those 3 being her rival. They had left the elemental nations over a week ago, and had already arrived in Britannia. A.N. They are all wearing their Shippuden outfits, and I will describe Kushina, Naruto, and Satsuki. Once they arrived, they began asking people on if they knew where the 7 deadly sins were. However, instead of being told, they were chased out of the port they had arrived in and were now currently traveling across the lands, asking towns and villages they passed if they had any information on any of the sins. This received results when they were told rumors of a wandering rust knight that was supposedly one of the 7 deadly sins. With this new information, they began searching for the knight but came up empty. Currently, the group was resting in a tavern called the Boar Hat that was filled with drunk men. So, any news? This was asked by Hinata Hyuga, and she came along to find her shared boyfriend Naruto. Nothing, we couldn't find out anything new other than what we know. Hinata's teacher, Kurina Yuhi, answered, and she came along to help find Ban and provide support by using Gain Jutsu to allow easier escapes and retrieve information easier. Damn it! Why can't we find anything? This was exclaimed by Naruto, who had definitely grown up over the years. Naruto wore a red kimono-style blouse with black trimmings over a mesh armor shirt, black bicycle shorts, and a red apron skirt with black, low-heeled sandals. Strapped to her hip was a katana with a white wrapped handle and a black sheath that had a red fox design. Calm down, Naruto. Remember, it takes time and patience to get information. Yeah. You can't expect information to just come to you and go, hey, here I am, without you having to lift a finger. These 2 were Anko Mitarashi and Hana Inuzuka. Anko came in order to retrieve information from any enemies they encounter and capture. Hana came for the same reason as Hinata, to find her shared boyfriend. They're right, you know. The best things always come to those who wait. This was said by Naruto's mother, Kushina Uzumaki. Kushina now wore a black, short-sleeved shirt with a red hooded jacket vest that had white fur lining the hood and black, form-fitting pants with black shinobi sandals with her signature katana, the Red Queen, strapped to her back. She came along because she wants to find and reconnect with her lost son, so relax a little. Yeah, can't have my rival getting weak and tired because she was stressed and didn't relax, chided the voices of the two final members of the group. One was Tenten Higurashi, and the other was Satsuki Uchiha, twin sister of Sasuke Uchiha, king of all emos. She had onyx black hair that reached to her up back with shoulder-length strands framing her face and matching eyes. She was wearing a black kimono-style blouse with white trimmings while underneath she was wearing a mesh armor shirt and had bandages wrapped around her chest. She also had a black apron skirt and short shorts, with black, low-heeled sandals. She was also carrying a katana that had a white wrapped handle and a black sheath with her clan symbol of a red and white fan designed into it. Tenten came along because she wanted to find her shared boyfriend, and Satsuki came along so that she could also train and memorize training techniques used in Britannia for the elemental nations. I know, it's just that it's been almost a month since we've been here, and the only lead we have so far is this so-called Wandering Rust Knight. Naruto replied, and the group understood how she was feeling when they were suddenly brought drinks. They turned to the person to see a small kid with messy blonde hair and green eyes. He was wearing the bar uniform that consisted of an ordinary, clean white button-front shirt and a black sleeveless vest on top with a loosely worn tie, while wearing white pants that end at his knees and a pair of black boots but doesn't wear socks. On his back is a little green bag with a purple zipper along with a sword scabbard with a sword handle appearing over his left shoulder that takes the shape of a green dragon. Here go. You girls looked kind of stressed about something, so I figured some drinks would help. The boy said. Thank you, but aren't you a little young to be working as a waiter? Asked Kushina, feeling her motherly instincts kick in over the young boy. I'm not a waiter. My name's Meliodas and I'm the owner, replied the boy with a smile. This got confused looks from everyone on how a little kid could be the owner, and where they heard his name. Hey Sonny, what's that there sword you got? Asked another drunk man. Before the boy could answer, however, some bandits with swords came in and began shouting, All right. Hand okay, vary your money, you old folks. Then they spotted the group of women, and looked at them with lust, and you women are coming with us as well, one of the bandits said before he kicked lips which got the women to cringe in disgust. Before they could defend themselves, however, the boy from before appeared in front of the bandits with a plate of food and said, Hey, do want some food first? The bandits and women looked at him like he had grown a second head, while all the men shuddered in fear for a second. The bandits looked at the food and saw that it looked delicious and decided to eat the food and then continue with their rubbing of the people in the tavern. However, the instant they all took a bite, the bandits began spitting out the food with cries of disgust. The shook his head and shrugged his shoulders while calmly saying, Oh well, still gross. If you knew it was horrible, then why did you feed it to us? Shouted the bandits. So you can tell me if it's still bad. The boy replied calmly, We'll kill you. The bandits shouted, Clean it up. The boy said with a serious face before snapping his fingers, Geez, what a pain. What do you want from me? Oink, said a talking pig that was walking over and was pink with a clover-shaped mark on its rump. Hawk, clean the floor. The boy said, How about feeding me some better scraps? Hawk said. The boy must have taken offense to that because he then turned around and said with a serious face, If it's a whole pig roast, I'm confident I could do it. Hawk then began exclaiming how the scraps were absolutely delicious and the best in the world. This got the reaction of making everyone laugh at the duo's antics. The bandits were starting to get annoyed and were about to begin shouting again when Meliodas appeared in front of them and said, I suggest you fellows leave before I get upset. The bandits grew fearful and ran away. Hey boy, can you really fight with that sword? Asked one of the men, which gained the attention of everyone onto the boy. The boy just smiled and shook his head while pulling out the sword and putting it straight into the air, to show that it was a broken sword with only 3/4 of an inch being the actual blade. Nah. This received even more laughter from the people, including the women who, despite being shocked at the display, couldn't help but find the situation funny. Before anybody could say anything else, however, a man burst in, panting with a scared look on his face. The man then looked at everyone and said, I saw it. This got everyone to quiet down and listen as the man sat down and began to tell everyone about the night. This got reactions of people saying that they were just stories that parents used to tell their children to behave, or else the 7 deadly sins would come and get you in blood-rusted armor. Suddenly, everyone began to hear a loud, metallic thumping sound coming from outside the door to the tavern. Everyone began watching as suddenly the door opened up to reveal a large figure wearing rusted armor walking in, before saying the 7. This got all of the men to run out of the bar, leaving only the curious, young bar owner, and the group of women, who all looked surprised to find the person they were searching for suddenly do the exact opposite of what Enko had said earlier. "Hello, would you like something to drink?" asked the young bar owner, getting looks from the women like he had grown a second head. The 7. Deadly Sins, the knight muttered one more time before falling backwards to the floor, where the helmet fell off, revealing the face of a girl with silver hair covering her right eye and an earring hanging from her left ear that had a blue gem with the designs of a sun and moon with stars in it. Later on, we find the group in a room, with the young girl laying on a bed and the rusted armor lying in a corner. The young girl was wearing a black, skin-tight jumpsuit with black leggings that extend from her mid-thighs to just before her toes, with matching black wraps on her arms covering from her wrists to just before her shoulders. The group, young bar owner and Hawk, had all been surprised, except the bar owner, at seeing such a young girl wearing all of that armor. While they were initially surprised, the group then became protective when they saw the young bar owner try to grope her chest with the excuse of making sure she was okay and alive. This got him thrown out of the room by the group of women before they asked Hawk to get a basin of cold water and a towel. Currently, the girl was resting on the bed, with a towel that was soaked in cold water on her forehead, sleeping peacefully, while the women were talking about the girl. "So, any ideas on why she would be walking around in such a big suit of armor in this heat? Clearly for a long time, if the heat stroke she is suffering from says anything," asked Tenten, knowing from her background as a co-owner of a weapons shop that metal armor will build up heat from being in the sun and when it's hot. "No idea, but we could ask her when she wakes up," offered Naruto, which got the group nodding in agreement, and maybe she knows something about the 7 deadly sins from what she was saying. Naruto mentally added, figuring that the girl must know something. "That is very true, and she also seems to have some strange energy coming from her, but I cannot tell what it is." Naruto didn't react to the voice in her head because she knew that it was Kurami talking to her from inside the seal, for you see, when Naruto was training when she was younger, she used too much chakra at one point and knocked herself out, where she eventually found herself coming face to face with Kurami, who explained that she didn't want to attack Konoha because she actually liked Konoha, if only because it was Mito's and Kushina's home, and that she had been forced by an Uchiha who called himself Madara. This had shocked Naruto, but she decided to trust Kurami and told her mom when she woke up, where they decided to look at the seal and rewrite it so that Kurami could have a body outside but her power would stay inside the seal and be regulated by Naruto, so that she wouldn't die because she was not strong enough to survive having a bijou removed from her seal like her mother was. "Okay, I'll keep an eye on her just in case she turns out to be dangerous," replied Naruto. "Okay, Kit, and I'll let you know when we start getting closer to Naruto because currently, it feels like he is stationary and has been for a few years now," informed Kurami. "Got it," Naruto answered before snapping out of it when she and the rest heard the girl begin to stir. They opened her eye to show a dazzling blue eye before she looked around curious about her surroundings and was surprised to see the group all either standing or sitting around her. The girl gained a slight flustered look and stuttered, "Hello there," while waving her hand. "Hello, it's good to see that you're up and feeling better. You gave us quite a scare there when we saw you passed out from heat stroke," informed Hana, having some medical experience even though it was mostly towards animals. The girl looked even more flustered at that. "Sorry about that," she apologized while bowing her head. The group just giggled at her antics, and told her it was fine and that she didn't have to bow. They soon found out her name is Elizabeth. They then began to talk about what she was doing, wandering around in such big armor in this heat, and she informed them that she was looking for the 7 deadly sins. The group and Hawk were all surprised at hearing that answer. Before they could continue, however, there was a loud noise from outside in the main part of the tavern where they heard a bunch of knights saying they serve under some Lord Twigo, in search of the Rust Knight who had been spotted in the area. The group came out of the room, after telling Elizabeth to stay put, and were prepared to defend the girl when they heard the bar owner say that he knew where the Rust Knight was, and then Hawk exclaimed he was the Rust Knight when he came out with random pieces of the rusted armor that Elizabeth had been wearing strapped to his body. Before anyone could do anything, a knight outside began shouting about a woman running into the forest. The knights gave chase to Elizabeth, saying they just had to tire her out before Lord Twigo arrived. As the knights were chasing Elizabeth, they were being attacked by the group and Hawk. This caused the knights to focus on the group and not notice Elizabeth being picked up by two people into a tree, before the last knight ran off the cliff. In the tree were Elizabeth, Meliodas, and Naruto looking down as the knights fell. So, how does the rest of that story go? Why are you looking for the sins? Asked Meliodas and Naruto at the same time, just as the rest of the group began appearing. Elizabeth began explaining that she was looking for the 7 deadly sins, in order to stop the holy knights. As she was explaining all of the horrible things that the knights did, they were unaware of another presence approaching them. Meliodas began saying how it might not be possible to find the sins because of some rumors that they all died, when Elizabeth exclaimed that they were too amazing in order to die so easily. The group looked at her in surprise when suddenly the ground began shaking. It turned out that the cliff had been sliced clean through and was falling to the ground. Standing on the area where the cliff was sliced, stood a knight with a thick mustache and dark red armor. The knight looked down and said, "Confirmed? 10 unknown people, dead." He then looked behind himself. "Is that all right?" He was asking the 4 knights that were standing behind him. But Mr. Alioni was beneath the cliff," said one of the knights. "Then we can say 11 dead." The knights were shocked at how calmly this knight said that and said, "But, Lord Twigo, that's horrible." The now named Twigo turned them and asked, "Then, 15 dead? Anything but that." The knights shouted in fear. The 5 knights then heard several sighs of relief and turned to see the group of women with a red-headed teenage girl carrying Elizabeth, and Meliodas carrying Hawk and Mr. Alioni. The 4 knights shouted in surprise and relief, "Mr. Alioni, Twigo, however, what are you all doing alive? Don't change my confirmed death toll." The entire group minus Elizabeth and Mr. Alioni all shouted or calmly said, "Don't confirm it on your own." As the group was checking on each other, Twigo saw Elizabeth's earring. "Well, it seems I'm in luck. That symbol is of the royal family." "Which means you are confirmed, Princess Elizabeth," he exclaimed, getting shocked looks from the group except for Meliodas. "Princess Elizabeth? As in the princess of the kingdom?" The group and Hawk shouted in surprise, while Meliodas just looked curious. Twigo then said, "There is a search order for you throughout the kingdom. You won't run, will you? The order is for your capture, but nothing can be done if you were killed in an accident." The group began running into the forest, with Elizabeth shouting how she can't be captured and that she won't give up. Twigo then swung his sword in their direction while shouting, "Confirmed. Accidental death." Once he swung, he caused the entire forest to be cut down. But everyone was okay except for some scratches and dust, with Hawk being the worst, with a stick being stabbed into his rump and Meliodas having his left sleeve blown off. Elizabeth was lying on the ground crying about how she was being saved by a group she didn't know and a man whose name she didn't know. Meliodas then smiled and told Elizabeth that his name was Meliodas, causing her to be surprised, and she, along with the rest of the group, all finally noticed the symbol on his arm. "A dragon?" Elizabeth stuttered in shock, with the others being surprised as well. As she was saying this, Twigo came up to them and swung his sword down on them, causing a huge cloud of dust to appear. Twigo stood there thinking this time he got the group of people, when suddenly he was hit with a blow of strength, blowing him back. He looked up and everyone was surprised to see Meliodas wielding his broken sword in his left hand. Twigo grew angry at this and began shouting, You plan on fighting me with that trash?" "Trash is just fine," answered Meliodas. Elizabeth then began asking, "Are you really that Meliodas?" Twigo was shocked hearing this. "Meliodas? Wait, I remember seeing your face before." "No. If that's the case, then why do you not look any different from before?" Meliodas then stood with his sword ready as if to swing from the right to the left with his knees bent. "Have you figured out who I am?" Twigo got a look of fear and began shouting it. "It can't be. Truly you are." Twigo then swung with all his strength shouting, "Uaare." Meliodas then swung his sword out and introduced himself. 7 deadly sins, the dragon's sin, Meliodas. Twigo was then hit with all of the power that he used when he swung, sending him flying. The group and Elizabeth all looked at Meliodas in shock as Meliodas just calmly watched Twigo go flying as he said, "Oh, he sure went up high." He then resheathed the broken sword, turned to Elizabeth and said, "Well, looks like you found the first one. Elizabeth, about the remaining 6, I've actually got business with them too. so I've been searching for them as well as of late. I've been using the bar in order to find information about them. If I had a serving girl, then I'd be able to get more customers and more information. You'll come with me, right? Elizabeth looked shocked at the offer and smiled brightly while exclaiming, yes. Actually, a voice said. This earned the attention of Meliodas and Elizabeth, who both turned to see the women standing looking at Meliodas with serious looks. We will be coming along as well. Meliodas and Elizabeth both grew confused. Why? Asked Meliodas. Then Naruto stepped forward and said, because we have been looking for the sins, in order to see if they would help us find someone. Elizabeth then decided to ask, who are you looking for? Kushina answered this time, we're looking for my son. He was mistakenly banished from our village by my ex-husband simply because of something that he held and for false charges. We want to find him and bring him back home. Why do you think we would be able to help you? Asked Meliodas with a curious yet serious face. Because we received information that the fox's sin of greed, Ban, has the last known location of my son, Naruto. Replied Kushina. This caused Meliodas to go wide-eyed as he then answered, I know that name. Everyone looked at him in surprise. You know Naruto? Asked the group of kunoichi. Meliodas nodded his head. Yeah, Ben used to talk about that name all the time. He told us stories about many adventures that he said were told to him by Naruto. The group grew extremely happy, knowing that they now had a solid lead. So can we come with you? Asked Tenten. Meliodas just smiled and nodded his head saying, sure, I think it'll be fun and amazing to help you guys out. Besides, one or two of you became serving girls as well, and can help cook. That'll also let us get more information. Suddenly, a giant green pig appeared and everyone noticed the boar had on its back along with Hawk, who had run away earlier. Nice timing, Hawk's mom! Exclaimed Meliodas, and then he and everyone else climbed on Hawk's mom. With this, everyone looked forward, all of them ready to continue their journey, Elizabeth and Meliodas to find the other 7 sins and the group of kunoichi to look for Naruto, but decided to help Elizabeth along the way. None of them knew what was in store for them, but they all knew one thing. No matter what happens on this journey, it was going to be one hell of an adventure. Boar Hat. The group had been traveling for a few days now and had made great progress thanks to Hawk's mom taking them, while they all rode in the tavern. As they continued on their journey, they all began introducing themselves. Elizabeth properly introduced herself as Elizabeth Leoness, the 3rd princess to the kingdom. Afterwards, the group of kunoichi all began to introduce themselves as ninja from the elemental nations, and that they were searching for leads on Naruto's whereabouts, and that they had heard Ban knew the last known location of Naruto. After they all introduced themselves, Meliodas welcomed all of them as official members of the Boar Hat Bar. Soon after, Elizabeth, Naruto, Hinata, Tenten, and Anko all got changed into the female uniform for the bar, which consisted of a short, pink, frilly shirt, with a black ribbon that exposes their belly buttons and hugs their busts, a dark miniskirt strapped with a pink belt, and a black stocking on the left leg and black and white heels. Anko didn't really care about the outfit, but Naruto, Tenten, and Elizabeth were all very flustered about the design of the outfit and the length of the skirts, but they began to relax when Kushina said she would work on them and change them a little bit for the girls. With this, they all sighed in relief. Before anyone could continue, however, Meliodas began circling around the 4 of them, checking the uniform to make sure they all okay, when he noticed something that most of the kunoichi had. Hey, began Meliodas, getting everyone's attention, I just noticed this, but why are some of you wearing necklaces with the same thread? He asked, also gaining Elizabeth's curiosity on the subject. They then saw the group take on sad smiles before Hinata answered. The necklaces were made by Naruto, and only he made these specific necklaces because only he could make the charm and the thread. She said with a soft, sad smile. Meliodas became curious. How come only he could make them? This time Tenten answered, only he could make them because the material for the charms would be imbued with chakra, which is the energy used in the elemental nations, and would make it stronger when finished. However, this made it brittle when it came time to carve, and he had experimented several times, until he found the right technique to carve them, where he would then begin making jewelry with them. But why is this important? Asked a curious Elizabeth. This is important because the jewelry he made, like these necklaces, became very well known among the village, mainly the women, because of the fact that they shine so brightly, they wouldn't rust or break, and they actually protect the women wearing them from attempted rape and murder unless they died in combat. However, because of this, many men began to try and find out his techniques in order to be able to carve their own charms so that either they could get women to favor them and get in bed with them, or so that they could create their own charms in order to bypass the effects of the jewelry he made. Informed Kushina, Meliodas and Elizabeth finally realized why these necklaces were so important. But then Meliodas asked, "But if he made different types of jewelry, how come you girls only have necklaces?" Those of the group wearing necklaces pulled the necklace out, but they held the charms in their hands where Meliodas and Elizabeth couldn't see what the charm was. This time, it was Hannah who answered. "It's because when he made the necklaces we're wearing, he told us that he also added an effect that if we were to ever be at death's door, it would let him know and he would instantly appear before us in order to save us." Hannah informed while smiling softly, along with the rest of the kunoichi at how thoughtful Naruto was. Meliodas and Elizabeth both smiled as well upon hearing how amazing this Naruto sounded. Then Elizabeth decided to ask Meliodas a question that had been on her mind. "Sir Meliodas," began Elizabeth, "there's something I wanted to ask you." Meliodas turned to Elizabeth along with the kunoichi to see what she wanted to ask. "Yes? Are the seven? Are you really as much of a villain as everyone says you are?" asked Elizabeth. "And if so, what kind of crime did you commit?" asked Elizabeth. This gained the attention of the kunoichi as well, wanting to know why he was considered a criminal. "Well, my crime," began Meliodas, getting the others to lean forward slightly in anticipation at hearing this information, "is that 10 years ago I went around Britannia, stealing all in the panties in sight," informed Meliodas with a straight face. The entire group became flustered, with Elizabeth and Hinata being more so, before they all exclaimed, "Panties? You're lying?" "It's a lie," Meliodas said nonchalantly, getting the others to face fault. "Actually, I walked around groping the breasts of over 1,000 women," Meliodas then said, still with a straight face. The group began to blush more, before they exclaimed, "Seriously? You're kidding, right?" "Of course I'm kidding," Meliodas replied nonchalantly again, causing the group to face fault again. "Sir Meliodas, please stop making fun of me," exclaimed a blushing Elizabeth. "Or is it possible that you can't talk about it?" Meliodas then calmly said, "Something like that." The group then said, "Huh!" But before they could continue any further, the boar hat suddenly began shaking and there was the loud cry of Hawk's mom. The shaking was so severe that Elizabeth would have fallen over if Naruto hadn't held her up, as she and the rest of the kunoichi stood perfectly fine by sticking to the ground using chakra. However, Meliodas took this chance to make it seem like he slipped and accidentally read purposely, fell into Naruto's breasts, which caused her to get flustered and smack Meliodas upside the head with her sheathed katana. "Looks like we've arrived," Meliodas said calmly, with a huge lump on his head from Naruto hitting him on the head. "Arrived where? Where is here?" asked Anko. "The next area where we can get information," Meliodas informed, "the village of Britannia." 5 minutes later, we find everyone standing outside, watching in amazement as Hawk's mom began to dig herself underneath the ground until she disappears completely, with the boar hat being the only thing in view. Meliodas then looked at the group, and decided that Kushina, Sasuke, Hinata, Hawk and Elizabeth would follow him to the village while the rest stay and set up the bar for business later. The 5 of them then left, and with that they began their walk into Vanya. As they were walking, Meliodas was informing them about how, even though he fills his bar with alcohol from all over Britannia, the alcohol from Britannia was special due to their spring water that was the best in Britannia, and that with the grout, herbs used in making ale, that grows along the river, it was the best ale around. That was when they realized that the river was all dried up with the herbs wilting. They then noticed all of the people that were gathering in the middle of town, and they believed it was a festival. "Hey guys, what's up?" asked Meliodas while walking up, gaining the attention of some of the guys who usually drink at his bar, before he then asked, "What's up with this festival today?" This was the wrong thing to ask, as the men then got angry. "Does this look like a funking festival?" they shouted before exclaiming, "We're trying to pull a sword out that a holy knight stabbed into ground." This confused Meliodas, and he muttered to himself, "He stabbed it into the ground. Why would he do that?" Then an elder came over and informed the group how a holy knight had been there previously, and had brought his wrath down on the village, and he imbued the sword with mana before he stabbed it into the ground, locking the water away underground. "If this goes on, then we'll lose all of our water and the grout will die out," exclaimed a random villager. "And if that happens, then we won't be able to make any more Britannia ale." "Shit!" exclaimed another villager. "Why would a holy knight do such a thing? wondered Elizabeth, on why a holy knight would do such a thing. Is it that holy knight that you defeated before, Sir Meliodas? I don't think so. Kushina said, gaining Elizabeth's attention. The man from before was able to create whirlwinds when he swung his sword, and from I sensed, he could only manipulate wind. This feels different from him. You're right, agreed Satsuki, now gaining the attention of the others. Branching out from where the sword is stabbed are many branches of lighting and electricity that is slowly expanding, and is further closing the window for the water to return. Satsuki informed what she sensed from the sword. She's right, and that's not all, began Hinata with a sense of seriousness that she normally doesn't show. You see, ever since Naruto left, she had been getting help from her fellow harem sisters, Hana and Tenten, on how to be more confident, even if for brief moments at times. Along with the electricity, there appears to be a form of a security system, where either only someone as strong or stronger than the one who put the sword can remove it, or someone who has a very high lightning affinity. At this last part she had sent a subtle look towards Satsuki, who nodded at understanding what Hinata was implying. After the group was done talking, they all turned to see everyone resting and sweating heavily from trying and failing to remove the sword. As everyone was resting, 2 regular knights were sitting on the side laughing at the people for being unable to remove the sword. Then everyone heard a voice begin to shout at everyone, "Hey! What's up with this sad and depressed tone?" This turned out to be the voice of a little boy with hair that is skipped out in the middle like a broom, and has a scar on his left cheek. He is wearing a green shirt with yellow triangles lining the end of the sleeve, a light brown cloak tied around his neck, khaki shorts and sandals. The villagers recognized this boy as Mead. What's so big about a holy knight's sword? Don't worry, my friend from the 7 deadly sins will take of it, Mead exclaimed, getting Meliodas, Elizabeth, Kushina, Hinata, and Satsuki to look at him in surprise, while the 2 grunt knights grew fearful looks. At least until the villagers started shouting at Mead about how it was his fault that they were in this mess to begin with. Mead began to try and explain how he never meant for this to happen, but the villagers wouldn't hear of it and continued yelling at Mead. As this was going on, Kushina was slowly getting angrier and angrier at the way the villagers were treating Mead. She had enough when they began throwing rocks at Mead, even though they were hitting Meliodas, and saying they hate him. She then had Satsuki pick up Mead and begin running with the others, minus herself, Elizabeth and Hawk, following her to the boar hat. As they were running, the village elder was trying to get the people to stop, but they wouldn't listen. Maybe we came at a bad time, Hawk said, feeling bad about what just happened. He's a good kid, deep down, but the village elder began speaking with Elizabeth and Kushina listening. Back with the others, they had finally made it inside the boar hat, and they were now going to find out if Mead was telling the truth about being friends with one of the 7. Hey kids, Satsuki began, is what they said back there true? Mead ignored her, which gained her a tick mark, and simply asked, hey, isn't this a bar? Meliodas answered, it's my bar, the boar hat. I'm hungry, Mead exclaimed to Meliodas. Money? Asked Meliodas. Nope, replied Mead. Then I'll feed you, once you give me some information, bargained Meliodas. Food first, exclaimed Mead. 10 minutes later, and sitting in front of Mead was a plate of chicken that has a dollop of garlic butter on top that was melting down the chicken and some water to drink. The others, minus Kushina, Elizabeth, and Hawk, were all sitting around at the table or standing near the table, with Meliodas having a drink. Thanks for food, exclaimed Mead, before he began eating and then spit it out because it was still disgusting, seeing as Meliodas was the one who prepared it. When complaining, Meliodas simply told him that he never said Mead would receive bad-tasting food. So, is it true that you're friends with one of the 7? Meliodas asked while drinking some alcohol, while the others were leaning forward slightly in anticipation. That was so disgusting that I forgot, exclaimed Mead, getting the kunoichi to drop their heads in defeat at not getting anything. Mead then began to smell something that was awfully familiar before he looked at Meliodas in shock before exclaiming, that's Britannia ale. Then Mead began describing the ale, from its sweet, rich taste, to the delectable scent of apples. Then Mead exclaimed that it was the best ale ever, before he gained a sad look while he began to look slightly down. It was at this time that Elizabeth, Kushina and Hawk all returned. We heard from the village elder, Mead. Elizabeth while looking at Mead, who exclaimed, what a woman! And Elizabeth continued, you're a big prankster, aren't you? Elizabeth then moved closer to Mead with Kushina beside her. Then Elizabeth began, when I was little, my father scolded me for pulling pranks. Mead just turned his head and exclaimed, "Good for you." "Congrats." Elizabeth just smiled and continued, "I wanted his attention. Because he wasn't my real father." At this, Mead and everyone else, minus Kushina and Meliodas, looked surprised by this, and Elizabeth continued, "One time, I climbed the biggest tree in the garden to surprise him. He turned pale and started to climb up after me, even though he had never climbed a tree in his life. As expected, he couldn't climb up and fell down and got hurt. I can't forget about what happened, even now. If he had died back then." Elizabeth was interrupted by Mead when he slammed his hands down on the table, looking very scared, before he began to tell everyone how his parents were travelers who had passed away due to an epidemic when they stopped Britannia, and how ever since then, he had been alone. But the villagers would take care of him and raised him, and that he was really happy, but felt jealous of all the families that could go home together with smiles on their faces, and so he had started to tell lies and pull pranks. He then explained, when Elizabeth asked him, that he had put a worm in the Holy Knight's drink because he had insulted the village's hard work by saying it had only been slightly better than horse urine. "The Holy Knights are fakes," exclaimed Mead. "So when you said that one of the 7 were your friend?" asked Meliodas. "It was a lie," Mead confessed sadly. After Mead said that, he felt a hand running through his hair, and looked up to see that the owner of the hand was Kushina, who was smiling softly at Mead. "You know, you remind me an awful lot of my son when he was young too," Kushina said, while still smiling. This got everyone's attention, especially Naruto's, because she didn't know what her brother was like when he was younger, only that he cared for her and their mother deeply. "What was he like?" asked Mead, wanting to hear about this woman's son. Kushina just smiled brightly and looked out the window at the village before she began. "He used to be loud, and unable to sit still for long periods of time. He would pull pranks and tell jokes, and get in trouble for attention. In fact, he once painted over the monument we have in our village of all the previous and current leaders, in broad daylight, while purposely wearing a bright orange jumpsuit." At this, Kushina and all the Kunoichi began giggling or laughing, remembering that day. Kushina then continued, "The best part was that nobody had noticed him doing this, until he had purposely began shouting how the villagers were a bunch of idiots, and how the village shinobi must have been blind, if nobody could see him. Then, he began running as all of the shinobi in our village began chasing him, and yet they couldn't catch him, but then he was found by his academy teacher, and brought to me." Kushina continued, before she then gave a small yet sad smile. "I still remember looking at him, covered in paint, with the top part of the jumpsuit unzipped and hanging by his waist, why he had done such a thing." Kushina then turned to Mead and asked, "Do you know what he told me?" Mead just softly shook his head negatively and asked, "What did he say?" Kushina then replied, "He told me that he did it because he wanted a different kind of attention from the villagers." This answer confused Mead, Elizabeth, Hawk, and even Meliodas. Why would he want a different kind of attention? What was he receiving? asked Elizabeth. Kushina then grew a frown that showed her anger, disappointment, and sadness. When he was growing up, he was made fun of for looking different than me and his father, but he was also hated and treated horribly by the villagers because of an event that had happened during his birth, that he had no control over. "What happened?" asked Mead, who was feeling sadness at how her son was treated, with Elizabeth and Hawk feeling horror at how adults could treat a child. Kushina then went on to explain how during Naruto's birth, their village was attacked by a fierce demon known as the Kyuubi no Yoko. This earned fearful looks from Elizabeth, Hawk, and Mead. Kushina then continued to explain how the shinobi of the village couldn't defeat such a powerful creature, and so her ex-husband had convinced the previous leader to assist him in sealing away the demon. However, because it was so powerful, no non-living object would hold it, and so they sealed half inside of her ex-husband, and the other inside of her son. This caused the trio, of Elizabeth, Hawk, and Mead, to all gain looks of horror, while Meliodas started to look angry at what the villagers did, and then great sadness when Kushina explained how her ex-husband told the village of his status of being the demon's jailer, but the villagers had looked at him as if he was the demon itself and thus treated him terribly. But when their daughter was revealed to be the same 3 years later, when her ex-husband couldn't hold his half of the demon anymore and transferred it into her body, she was greeted as a hero. This caused everyone to get angry looks on their faces at how bigoted people are. Mead looked frustrated and sad, then he said, "People like that are terrible, and the Holy Knights are no different. That's why I told everyone that I was friends with one of the 7 deadly sins, because if the Holy Knights are afraid of anything, it would be them. Once Mead said this, everyone just slowly turned to Meliodas, who was drinking alcohol, when he noticed everyone looking at him and said, "What?" Everyone then began to hear a commotion from the village and decided to head down there, with Mead taking off to the village. Once they got close enough, they understood what was going on, because the knights had begun announcing that if the village couldn't remove the sword soon, then they would increase the taxes. The people started complaining and began to blame Mead again, when the elder exclaimed that he had had enough of their blaming Mead when all he did was express how everyone else was feeling. The village suddenly got extremely worked up and began trying even harder to remove the sword by pulling on ropes they had tied to the sword. Then Mead joined in, but the sword just wouldn't budge. They were trying and pulling so hard that they started to tear open their hands from the strength in their grip, while the rope began to run through their hands. As this was going on, the grunt knights from before were just sitting on the side drinking the village's ale while laughing at the people. As they were about to toast their cups, they found the cups missing, and in Meliodas' hand, with him saying that those who don't understand the taste of alcohol shouldn't drink it at all. The villagers had all fallen to the floor, sweating and panting like crazy from all of the effort they put in. As they were doing this, Meliodas was walking to the sword while finishing off the drinks he had taken from the knights. When he finished, he put the cups on the floor and said, "That was good, but unfortunately, I don't have anything to pay you guys with." As he said this, he took a hold of the sword handle, then asked, "So, how about this?" And with that, Meliodas pulled the sword out of the ground, with everyone looking at him in shock at how easily he pulled the sword out. Then there was a rumbling noise coming from underground, and right where the grunt knights were sitting, the water just suddenly exploded outward, causing the villagers to shout in excitement and joy about the water being back. Everyone began celebrating about having the water back, and the Kunoichi and Elizabeth were all smiling at the villagers' happy faces. The grunt knights, who finally came down from being launched into the air, were on the floor gathering their thoughts, when Meliodas came over, still holding the sword over his shoulder, and said, "Get out of here." The 2 grunt knights then took off, running away in fear, with the people still celebrating. As Meliodas was still watching the knights run, with the sword still on his shoulder, Mead came up to him and began to ask, "Hey, could you really be?" But then Meliodas interrupted him, "Yep. I am the proud owner of a fine drinking establishment known as the Boar Hat." Mead then tried to say what he meant, but Meliodas continued by asking, "Anyways, don't you have something to do?" At this, Mead turned around to see all of the villagers looking at him with apologetic looks, and then they began to apologize to Mead and asking if he could forgive them, but Mead tried to look tough, until Meliodas gave him a gentle push forward, and that was when Mead ran to the villagers with tears falling. As Mead began running, Meliodas said, "No matter what lies you make up, you can't lie to your heart." Then he got a sad look on his face, which was not missed by the Kunoichi or Elizabeth. But then they were all surrounded by the villagers expressing their gratitude and saying that they should all celebrate. Meanwhile, at Fort Soldales, a knight is seen informing a holy knight about what occurred at the village. The holy knight is a young man with short, slightly curled, pink hair and blue eyes. He is wearing a dark-colored, full-body suit of armor and has a single-handed sword at his side. The upper part of the armor has several crosses and the symbol of the holy knights carved into it. He also had a leather belt tied around his waist. This is Holy Knight Gilthunder, and he doesn't seem to be impressed by what he is hearing. Back at the Boar Hat, we find all of the villagers celebrating getting their water back and being free of the holy knights, if only temporary. Off to the side, we find Elizabeth being nervous about something. "CA. Can I really do this? It's my first time doing something like this. My heart is pounding," Elizabeth said while looking embarrassed. Hinata was no better and said, "Me too." Meliodas simply began nodding his head up and down. I see. "Can you two say that again?" Meliodas said while leaning in with a slight blush and steam puffing out of his nose. At least until he was smacked upside the head by Naruto's sword still in its sheath and a frying pan being wielded by Kushina, both having glowing eyes and their hair floating while looking like Ninetails. "Get your head out of the gutter!" exclaimed Naruto. "Please behave yourself around these young women, Meliodas," Kushina said. "Anyways," began Meliodas, while having 2 still steaming lumps on his head, "you'll be fine as waitresses until you get a better hang of it. Getting information only the 7 is important, yes, but so is getting information on the Holy Knights and what they're up to. Anyways, that's it for the serious talk. Just get out there and do your best, you four. With this, Elizabeth, Naruto, Hinata, Tenten, and Anko all said, right. With that, the 5 of them began serving the villagers, while also trying to get information on any of the 7 deadly sins, as well as the holy knights. Anko was able to get the hang of waiting people and collecting information easily. Naruto and Tenten took a little longer because they had never really served people before, but they eventually got the hang of it. Hinata as well took even longer because of her nervousness around people not being completely gone, but she eventually got it. Elizabeth, however, she really showed that she had never waited people before, as she kept getting orders wrong, dropping meals, and slipping on things. Eventually she slipped again, but this time, she ran outside with tears flowing down her face. When she ran outside, Meliodas and Naruto both suddenly felt an enormous amount of power heading in their direction. Meliodas was about to head outside, but Naruto looked at him and shook her head, saying she would handle it. And Elizabeth, once outside, Naruto was looking at the sky, trying to figure out where the energy was aiming specifically, when she heard sniffling and saw Elizabeth crying with her head in her knees. She then stood in a specific spot when she finally found where it was going to pass and stood there ready, before she turned to Elizabeth and said, "Not everyone has an easy time doing something for the first time, you know?" Elizabeth then turned her head towards Naruto and said, "I know that, but I'm just useless. I can't get the orders right. I break all of the plates and cups, and I can't even get information that helps us. When I thought I had something about the Holy Knights, it just turned out to be about some forest that they avoid, which doesn't do us any good." Elizabeth finished, feeling depressed about all of the mistakes she made. It's laughable. A useless waitress wants to protect the people of this country. Naruto was quiet for a second before. When I started out being a kunoichi, I made a lot of mistakes. I was loud. I missed details on missions that led my team to failing, and when I was little, I got frustrated at being unable to do a technique like my mom and ran into the forest getting lost. But whenever I got upset, or sad, or felt useless, I would always remember what my Nisan would say. Naruto told Elizabeth, getting her to look at her and ask, "What did he say?" Naruto then began to softly smile at the memory of her niece and giving her one of the most important lessons she would ever learn. Flashback 7 years ago. A 9-year-old Naruto had been running through the forest, upset at failing to understand how to do her mom's adamantine chains again. She had been running for almost half an hour when she realized that she didn't know which way to go back home. She began to get scared and cried because it was dark in the forest, and she was afraid of the dark. Suddenly, she heard something further out in the forest. "Ko." At first it sounded faint, but as she began to move in the direction, it began to get louder and more clear until she realized something. Naruto! It was her name being called out, and she began to shout, "I'm here! Help! Over here!" 5 minutes after she shouted, she began to hear rustling in the bushes in front of her and began to get frightened again. She thought it was a ferocious animal that had heard her and was coming to eat her before help could arrive. Then, the rustling got louder, and she closed her eyes thinking she was a goner until "Naruto!" She heard the voice shout, in surprise and relief, which got her to look and see her Nisan there, bent over with his hands on his knees, panting, showing that he had been running around looking for her. Then he looked up at her with a smile and said, "There you are. Let's get you home." 5 minutes later, we find Naruto walking through the forest with Naruto on his back. Then Naruto decided to talk. "What were you thinking? You could have gotten hurt or worse. Running off into the forest at this time." "I'm sorry," muttered Naruto. "I was just upset." "Upset? Upset about what?" exclaimed Naruto. Naruto began to cry as she dug her head into his back and said, "I couldn't do mom's chains again. I keep trying and I never get it. Maybe I'm just useless." Naruto finally understood what the problem was inside before speaking. "You're not useless, you know?" Naruto then felt Naruto bring her head out, and this told him he had her attention, so he continued, "You should never consider yourself useless, because nothing is useless. Just look at me. I've only been a shinobi for a little over a year, and I've made lots of mistakes. At one point, I began to think like you, and thought I, myself, were useless." At this, Naruto looked at her Nisan in shock, before he continued, "But then I realized, I may think of myself as useless, but that just means it isn't my time to shine yet. Once it becomes my time, I will do my best to shine brighter than everybody else, because if I'm useless, then that means I can't protect what's precious to me." At this time, the duo had finally made it out of the forest and could see the village up ahead. Then, Naruto put Naruto down, kneeled in front of her and said, "I want you to make me a promise," getting Naruto to focus on him. "In the future, I may not always be here to help you out of your funk, so I want you to remember these next words that I tell you." Naruto then saw her Nisan look at her with such love, courage, and determination that she knew no matter what happened next, she would never forget it. Present. Naruto then looked at Elizabeth and said, "He told me, should you ever begin to feel useless and that you can't do anything right, I want you to remember that I will always believe in you no matter what you do or how many times you fail, and if that's not enough, then believe in the me that believes in you." This got Elizabeth to look at Naruto with wide eyes. Then Naruto said, "So, just like my Nisan said, if you can't believe in yourself, then believe in the me and the others who believe in you." This got Elizabeth to begin crying at hearing someone believes in her, and besides, that information about the forest may be something, so that means you aren't useless. Elizabeth then nodded her head and said with a big smile and tears flowing down her face, "Right." Naruto smiled and nodded before she turned back to the direction she had been facing before with a serious face and said, "Good. And right now, I'll show what all of that hard work achieved." Elizabeth then watched as 4 chains came out of Naruto's back. They were light purple and looked to be permeating with power, and at the end of each chain was what looked like spear heads. Then Elizabeth looked in the direction Naruto was facing and saw what looked like a spear surrounded by lightning heading right for them. Naruto then surrounded her right arm in chains and formed a hand on the end and raised it with the hand open. And then, right as it passed Naruto, she grabbed it with her hand, but the power and force behind it caused her to shoot off in the direction of the town. Elizabeth then shouted, "Naruto!" in shock, as she watched one of her fellow travelers shooting off towards the village and begin to crash through several buildings before she finally managed to stop the spear, but her right sleeve had been destroyed from the power of the lightning. Then she spun the spear around and threw it back in the direction it came from while adding some of the Kyuubi's chakra to add power and speed, which caused the spear to look as if it was on fire with some purple due to the chains, and began to pump chakra into her own arm as well to strengthen her throw. The spear then flew off into the distance while giving the anime twinkle in the sky. And think what Team Rocket does in Pokemon when they blast off. Back at Fort Soul Gales, Gil Thunder was going through some paperwork when he felt it. Then coming from the direction of the village was the same spear which then crashed into the chair Gil Thunder was using, but the force from the throw caused the entire fort to receive cracks all over the building. Then when the dust cleared, it revealed Gil Thunder to not have moved except for moving his head to the left a bit, and suffered a small cut. The spear was embedded in the chair and still looked to be on fire as the last of Kyuubi's chakra left the spear along with the purple energy from the chains. Gil Thunder was surprised by this energy and said, "Well now, who are you? And are you with Meliodas?" Back at the village everyone was watching as Naruto undid the chains covering her arm to show that it was perfectly fine, if just a bit red on the hand from the amount of lightning. The others ran up to her and began to check on her, to which she was embarrassed on how they reacted and said she was fine, before Elizabeth asked, "Was that from the holy knight who put the sword in the village?" Meliodas then answered, "Probably." Naruto then said, "It might be better for the village if we were to leave." Elizabeth looked shocked at the suggestion and exclaimed, "But what if the holy knight attacks the village again? It would be more dangerous if we were to stay here. Besides, thanks to you, we now have a new place to go and check," answered Naruto, while having her hand bandaged. Elizabeth was confused. "What do you mean? I didn't get any information," she exclaimed. Naruto simply chuckled and looked at Elizabeth before saying, "But you did. Remember the information about this forest that the holy knights avoid. And besides, what are we supposed to be doing anyways?" Elizabeth looked at Naruto with confusion for a second, and then she got a big smile and said, "Find the 7 deadly sins." It has now been almost a week since the group left Britannia village, and they are now traveling through a forest. However, this forest had no signs of life and was covered in a thick white fog. This forest was known as the Forest of White Dreams, and currently the entire group was walking together through the forest. Elizabeth then began climbing up some roots, with the of Naruto, and said, "It's been almost 3 hours since we entered the forest, but I haven't seen a single person or animal. I only see trees and their dead branches, and I'm getting sick of it." "Wank," said Hawk. "Could one of the 7 really be here, Meliodas?" asked Elizabeth. Before he could answer, Kushina beat him to it. "It is possible, Elizabeth. After all, with all of this fog, and the vastness of it, this could be the best place to hide. That may be true, but I heard rumors of monsters living here. Wink, said Hawk, while being slightly scared. Hannah came up to Hawk and began to rub his head while saying, "It's okay, Hawk, nothing is going to get you while we're here to help." This got Hawk to calm down, at least until he heard Elizabeth scream. This got the group to grip their weapons, with some pulling out kunai, and Naruto, Sasuke, and Kushina pulling out their swords, ready for a fight. Until they turned around and saw Meliodas groping Elizabeth's butt, which promptly got him smacks from the kunoichi. Meliodas then began talking, despite the numerous lumps on his head from the kunoichi, about how because the forest is covered by the fog all year round, that traveling by horse would be difficult, and that it would be easy to lose your sense of direction, and how even hunters avoid this forest, thus making it an ideal hiding spot from the holy knights. Suddenly, Elizabeth realized something was different about herself right now. This caused her to wonder what happened, which did not go unnoticed by the others. Naruto then asked Elizabeth if she was alright, which got Elizabeth to blush like crazy and reply that she was fine. Her response was met with some suspicion but was otherwise ignored. "Hey you guys! Hurry up already! Don't you know that monsters always attack when the people are messing around?" exclaimed Hawk. "Calm down, Hawk," said Meliodas. "No one likes a paranoid piglet." "Who a paranoid piglet?" came the reply of multiple voices at the same time, which got the group to turn and see that there were now multiple Hawks. The group was surprised to see something like this. Elizabeth asked if this was the work of the monster in the forest, and Meliodas simply said that Hawk must have been right about a monster, and that it was pretty crazy. All of the Hawks began to ask the group for help, while also saying that they each were fakes before telling the group to do something. While the group were trying to think on what to do, Meliodas solved everything by beating up every single Hawk there. The group looked surprised at the sudden bout of violence, with Elizabeth shouting in worry for Hawk. Then all of the Hawks ran behind Elizabeth while complaining about how even Hawk's mother doesn't hit him. Elizabeth got worried about Hawk and turned around to make sure he was okay, but when she turned around, she came face to face with a copy of herself. Suddenly, more and more copies came out. Before there were several copies of Elizabeth, all saying they were the real one, but the group just couldn't figure out which was the real one. The Elizabeth copies then moved forward and tried to attack the group, but the Kunoichi and Meliodas all disappeared and then reappeared by the Elizabeths. Meliodas then told the Elizabeths that they had to listen to everything he said. He took advantage of this and had all of the Elizabeths grope their own breasts, after getting them to say his name with an embarrassed, and put their right hand up with their left hand on their cheek. When the Kunoichi saw this, they all smacked him upside the head with their fists or their weapons that were still in their sheaths. Meliodas then said, with several lumps on his head, "This is the last test, jump as high as you can." The Kunoichi were confused at this request, until they saw all of the Elizabeths jump except for one, who crouched down to the floor while holding down her skirt, with a bright blush on her face. Meliodas then charged forward at a rapid pace and attacked all of the Elizabeths that were in the air, who then fell to the ground and exploded into a plume of smoke. Once the smoke cleared, it revealed a bunch of small, ugly creatures with blue skin and warts while wearing cloaks to cover their bodies and boots, who were all running away, deeper into the forest. "What were those things?" exclaimed Naruto, with the other Kunoichi wondering the same thing. "Those were prankster imps known as hide-and-seeks," informed Hawk. They began chase after them when Meliodas said to do so, but then also smacked him again when he revealed that he had taken Elizabeth's panties. As the group was chasing them, they saw the imps running to what looked like a little girl who was curled up, sleeping. This got the group to begin running faster, thinking the imps were going to attack the girl. At least until they got closer and saw that the little girl, in fact, wasn't so little. She looked to be 30 feet tall, had brown hair that was tied up in twin tails, and a well-endowed, curvaceous body. She was wearing short-sleeved, one-piece orange jumpsuit, matching colored boots with 5 cross laces that reach up to her knees, and 2 fingerless gauntlets of a blue-gray leathery material covered in shiny steel studs. The final thing that the group noticed was the serpent symbol that was on her left thigh. The group then noticed the imps go up to the sleeping girl and say, "Lo, Lord Diane, we've allowed a group of holy knights to come through. Please forgive us." At this, the newly named Diane's eyes snapped open, she stood up, and before the group could do anything, Meliodas and Naruto were snatched up in her hands with her wondering, "Holy knights? Hey giant woman, are you going to eat Meliodas and Naruto?" exclaimed Hawk. Please let Sir Meliodas and Naruto go, exclaimed Elizabeth. May I ask that you let my daughter go, please? Asked Kushina, while readying her weapon along with the other kunoichi, who were ready to attack at a moment's notice. Diane looked at the two in her hands before focusing on Meliodas, and squinted her eyes in focus while wondering out loud, Meliodas. Meliodas simply said, Hey, Diane. How've you been these past 10 years? Diane stared at Meliodas in concentration for a second before she grew extremely happy and exclaimed, Captain. Happy at seeing her captain again after 10 years. Hawk, Elizabeth, and the rest of the group were surprised to find out that this was Diane of the 7 deadly sins, with Hawk exclaiming, Diane? You mean this giant is one of the 7? The sin of envy, Diane? Diane looked and saw Hawk and thought that Meliodas brought her food because she loved whole roasted pig, but that was fervently declined. Diane then looked over towards Naruto and asked, So who are you? Naruto then introduced herself. Hello, my name is Naruto, and me and my fellow kunoichi along with Elizabeth there, are traveling with Meliodas in order to find the 7 deadly sins. Diane then put them both down and asked, Really? Why would you be looking for us? Elizabeth then answered, I am looking for the 7 because I wish for their help in stopping the Holy Knights. Diane nodded her head in understanding before looking over to the kunoichi group, who had finally relaxed after Naruto was released, and asked, So, what about you guys? Why are you looking for us? Kushina answered and said, We actually aren't looking for all of you per se, but more the sin of greed, Ban. Okay, but why are you looking for him? Asked Diane, with Meliodas answering, Remember all those stories that Ban used to tell us that he was told by this person named Naruto? He asked, getting a nod from Diane at her remembering. Well, it turns out that he was falsely banished from their village by her ex-husband, who was also their previous leader, and Ban, apparently, knows the last location that Naruto was. He continued, while pointing at Kushina when mentioning her ex-husband. Oh yeah! Exclaimed Diane, I remember those stories. I always loved listening to those stories. Diane then asked, What did your son look like and why did your ex-husband banish him? Meliodas told her that Naruto is actually the one who Ban based his looks off of, and then Kushina supported the identification, before she went on to explain about the Kyuubi and the years growing up, along with the charges that were later revealed to be false when her ex-husband was arrested and executed along with the corrupt civilian council and the advisors. During the explanation, Diane looked upset at the villagers for treating Naruto like that, and sad at what happened. And then, when we first heard about Ban knowing his last location, we trained my daughter for the past 3 years to get stronger, and then we left for Britannia. From there, we looked around and tried to gather information on the 7, Ban, or Naruto until we ended up at Meliodas' bar, where we ran into Elizabeth, and found out Meliodas was one of the 7 when defending Elizabeth from a Holy Knight apprentice. From there, we helped Britannia village where we got information about a forest that the Holy Knights avoid, and the rest is history. Kushina finished, getting Diane to look at the kunoichi in admiration at all that they could do, as during the explanation, they each gave brief descriptions of what they could. Wow! Exclaimed Diane with stars in her eyes, You guys sound amazing for humans. This got the kunoichi to chuckle, giggle, and laugh, along with Elizabeth, at seeing such a big girl act like such a little kid. Meliodas then decided to say, Hey Diane, about what happened 10 years ago. Diane caught on and asked, The day we were summoned by the great Holy Knight, right? Meliodas nodded before saying, I have almost no memory from that day. This got not only Diane, but the entire group to be surprised at someone not remembering anything. Meliodas then goes on to explain what he remembers on that day up until he doesn't anymore. And exactly the same as in the anime and manga. When I woke up, I was in a hole somewhere. That's actually where I met Hawk. Meliodas said, Do you think one of the 7 is a traitor and framed us for the murder of the great Holy Knight? Asked Diane. I dunno, that's why I'm looking for them, to try and find out what happened. But the one who will definitely remember is Ban. He somehow kept track of everything that happens around him, even when he drinks himself unconscious and can't remember, he does. Diane nodded her head agreeing with Meliodas about Ban. Then she lightly blushed remembering Ban and how kind and helpful he was to her. Alright. I, the serpent's sin of envy, Diane, will lend you my strength, exclaimed Diane. This got the group to exclaim in happiness and joy at getting another sin to help them along the journey. However, before they could begin moving out of the forest, they all heard Hawk exclaim, Guys! Look up! The group looked up to see a massive thunder cloud, when suddenly, several bolts of lightning came down and wrapped around everyone, paralyzing them in place. Then they heard someone stepping into the clearing with them, and when they looked they saw Gilthunder, who said, "So you are alive, Meliodas?" The group were all looking calm, except for Hawk and Elizabeth, who were struggling against their bonds, and Elizabeth exclaimed, "Gilthunder! What are you doing here?" "Gilthunder?" wondered Meliodas. "He's the Holy Knight." "Gilthunder? He's a holy knight that's very close to the king, my father," Elizabeth exclaimed. "Gilthunder?" Meliodas wondered again. "Where have I heard that name from? He always took care of me like a real little sister." "He's like a big brother to me," exclaimed Elizabeth. Then Naruto decided to ask, "Hey, this lightning, the sealed river in Britannia, and the attempt to wipe it out, that was all you, right?" "Naruto, that's a terrible thing to say. He's not the kind of person who would do such a..." Elizabeth shouted at Naruto, before she saw Gilthunder's face, and grew scared when she saw the evil look he had and the feeling of malice he exuded. "This is the same feeling from Britannia. It's a lie, right? You can't be!" she exclaimed with fear in her voice. "Elizabeth," Gilthunder began, "the kingdom's top priority is to ensure your safety. But that's got nothing to do with me. Whether you live or die is like a grain of sand in the path to the Holy Knight's rule." Gilthunder explained before. With a wave of his hand, he released the electric bindings on Elizabeth. "Leave. I only have business with the Sins, and the one who threw my spear back at me." The Kunoichi tensed, until Elizabeth then moved in front of the two Sins, the Kunoichi, and Hawk, stating, "I won't let you lay a hand on them. Release your spell and let them go." This got everyone to look at Elizabeth in shock at her bravery, before Hawk toppled over. "Brrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr hang on Hawk, before he was kicked away with a loud OINKK by Gil Thunder. The group was shocked by this, before Meliodas had a blade with a rounded end at his neck being held by Gil Thunder, who was behind him. Gil Thunder then asked Meliodas, "Do you know why we're after your heads?" "I dunno," was all Meliodas said. "Some say it's because the Holy Knights want to purge the traitorous knights who tried to overthrow the kingdom," Gil Thunder said, "while others are looking to increase their prestige and prove their strength by fighting the legendary Seven." "Oh yeah!" exclaimed Naruto. "And which might you be?" Gil Thunder simply said both. Then he explained, "Revenge for the death of my father, the great holy knight, Zarathustra, who was called the strongest holy knight. And by killing the Seven, I can prove I am stronger and surpass my father." Meliodas then exclaimed, "Now I remember. Your little Gil. The little kid who always followed us around, saying he wanted to be just like us." All with a smile. Then Meliodas exclaimed, "You sure have grown." Gil Thunder then appeared in front of Meliodas, and said that was in the past. "I am now stronger than any of you sins." "Maybe," said Meliodas, "but you don't know for sure." Gil Thunder thought for a second. "Then I will release you and we'll see," Gil Thunder said, getting ready to release the spell. Meliodas simply said, "Don't worry about it." And with that, Meliodas and Diane simply spread their arms open a bit, and when they looked at the kunoichi, they saw them be covered in smoke before revealing logs in their places, and then they came out from the shadows of the trees. This got Diane to look at them with stars in her eyes again and exclaim, "Cool!" getting the kunoichi to chuckle at her reaction, before she turned back to Gil Thunder with a calm face and waited with her hands on her hips. Meliodas and the kunoichi were stretching, seeing as they were bound for a good few minutes, and Meliodas said, "I could have broken out of there whenever I wanted if I felt like it. I could wipe out you and this entire forest if I felt like it." Gil Thunder said, I doubt it." "That's impossible," Meliodas said with a cheeky grin. Gil Thunder paused before saying, "Then I'll kill you, right back at ya." Meliodas responded. Gil Thunder then looked to the kunoichi and said, "When I am done with him, I will find out which of you threw my spear back." "Doubt it," said Enko, getting the kunoichi to chuckle again. "Besides, I'm pretty sure you won't beat him anyways." Gil Thunder then heard Meliodas say, "Diane, don't interfere," with Diane replying, "Okay, Captain." They both got ready, with Gil Thunder putting his left foot forward and sword ready to strike, and Meliodas put his right foot forward right next Gil Thunder's with his arms relaxed. Gil Thunder asked, "Too embarrassed to lose a fight, even if it's 2 against 1? Meliodas simply replied, "Don't you get it? I'm trying to be polite." Gil Thunder then brought his sword down and struck using a huge amount of lightning, before he noticed it be countered, and sent back at him by Meliodas' ability, full counter. Didn't I say? Asked Meliodas, right back at you. Gil Thunder then appeared behind Meliodas, showing he dodged the rebounded lightning and said, Didn't I say? He then slashed Meliodas' shoulder and continued, I'll kill you. Diane simply looked on with slight worry now visible along with the Kunoichi and Elizabeth when Meliodas was struck and began falling to the ground. After he hit the ground, Gil Thunder looked down at him and said, Meliodas, the dragon's sin of wrath, any last words? Meliodas then weakly began speaking, the others. The other 7, the rest of our group. I wanted to know where they are. Gil Thunder obliges Meliodas and says, very well. Of the remaining 5, we don't know the whereabouts of 3, but we already know where the other 2 are. Gil Thunder said before continuing, the fox's sin of greed is imprisoned in his base dungeon, and the grizzly's sin of sloth perished in the capital of the dead. Gil Thunder revealed. Meliodas continued to lie on the ground for a little longer, looking weak and about to die, before he snapped his eyes open and exclaimed, Thanks, with a smile. Meliodas then jumped to his feet and mused over the information out loud while still crouching. So, the fox is in base dungeon, and the grizzly is in the capital of the dead. He then stood up and said, Thanks, little Gil. I'll make sure to pay them a visit. Gil Thunder then understood what Meliodas did. I see. You purposely allowed yourself to get hurt and feigned weakness in order to find out about the others. Yup. So, we'll have to continue this another time, alright? Meliodas said. Gil Thunder then said, as if, I'll let you go. And attempted to strike Meliodas but was wrapped in glowing, purple chains. He looked back and saw one of the kunoichi with red hair holding him with the chains coming out of her back. He checked the chains and remembered the purple energy on the spear, and asked, So, you're the one who threw my spear back? That's right, exclaimed Naruto. Gil Thunder tried to get out of the chains using his magic but it didn't appear, which surprised him until Naruto said, There's no point in trying to break free or use your magic as these chains seal it away as long as you're wrapped in them. Naruto then tossed him up and yelled, Batter up! Which got Diane to pick up a tree and hold it over her shoulder before she swung at Gil Thunder, launching him into the air, when Gil Thunder channeled his lightning magic through the tree to Diane, in an effort to damage her, but did nothing except destroy her gloves along with the tree. At this time, Hawk came running back with scratches and burns, shouting about how he was going to beat up Gil Thunder until he realized that Gil Thunder was gone. Elizabeth then asked, Sir Meliodas, what about your wound? Meliodas shrugged it off and said, It's no big deal. However, before he could begin moving, he was hit with some saban needles in the left arm and left leg before Meliodas simply fell over. Diane, Elizabeth, and Hawk were surprised by this and looked towards the rest of their group and saw Hinata with veins slowing retreating back, showing she had just used her Byakugan, and was handing Tenten the rest of the saban needles she threw. Diane got mad and shouted, What are you doing? Why would you attack the captain? With Elizabeth wondering the same thing. Because he was injured and it was necessary, said Hannah while moving towards Meliodas, with her hands taking something from her ninja pouches, before she was grabbed by Diane, who was glaring at her and slightly squeezing her, causing her some pain, which got her to twitch. The rest of the kunoichi got their weapons ready and tensed. Satsuki then shouted, Let her go. Diane looked at her and said, No, she was going to kill the captain and you guys attacked him. So, why should I do as you say? Because he isn't dead, just temporarily paralyzed so that he can be treated, shouted Kurenai, getting Diane to look at Meliodas, who was still awake, and said, Yeah, I'm fine, Diane. I just can't move right now. Diane then opened her hand and saw that Hannah had some bandages, string, needles, and medicine to clean, stitch, and wrap the wound. This got Diane to look sheepish and put Hannah down, before apologizing, Sorry about that. It's just that the way you said that, and the sudden attack made me think you guys were enemies who had been pretending to be allies. The kunoichi relaxed and put away their weapons before smiling, with Kushina replying, It's okay. We understand, it's just we have a lot of knuckle-headed people in our village and my son used to be the same, where he would receive a wound but wouldn't treat it until he passed out after completing the mission or when there was a big enough break and we had to treat him. This got the group to smile at the times Naruto would act tough but then pass out from blood loss after the mission was completed. The Sins, however, looked surprised at how tenacious someone could be. This also got them thinking about Ban and how he used to be the same. This made the two Sins go wide-eyed, which was missed by the kunoichi as they were talking, at what they were thinking, and looked at each other, and saw they were thinking the same thing, Could Ban possibly know where Naruto is because he is in fact Ban? The group is now back on the road, with a patched-up Meliodas currently riding Diane's shoulder, holding up Ban's and King's wanted posters, while saying, the fox's sin was thrown into a dungeon, and the grizzly's sin is presumed dead and buried. What do you think, Diane? Well, if it is true that King is dead, then I say we check it out after getting Ban. Because there would be no point to going to the capital of the dead, completely passing base dungeon, which by the way is closer, and then finding out the rumor was true, and before needing to head back to base, wasting more time to find the others. Diane said with a light shrug so as to not throw off Meliodas and not jolt him too much to irritate his bandaged wound. It will also be best to head to the village first, as that way we can get a proper doctor to check on that wound and make sure it's okay and nothing is wrong with it, said Hannah, who, while confident in her skills as a medic, she was still only a veterinarian. Meliodas nodded his head and said, all right. Then let's go pick up Ban at base dungeon. The others shouting in agreement, with only Meliodas and Diane thinking, and to confirm if Ban is really this Naruto person we've been hearing about. Base dungeon. Ban was awake and humming while he was being tortured, completely unfazed by their attempts to cause him suffering. While they were in the middle of grabbing some other blades, he suddenly sneezed, which got the torturers to look at him as he sniffed and shrugged his shoulders as best he could while pinned with steel spikes. He then went back to humming and thought, why did I sneeze? Am I getting sick? But I never get sick. Ben then got a look of realization before he made a sly smile as best he could and thought with glee, someone must be talking about me. But who? It can't be that cute, blue-haired knight who I see pass by and give orders of the guard change. So it must be the others remembering me. Ben then got a look of glee which, because the torturers were watching him, they thought he wanted a specific tool, so they grabbed it and moved towards him to continue. Ban, however, didn't care about the torture, and instead was excited about meeting the other again, because he had this feeling, something exciting would happen soon, so this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video, guys. Let me know in the comment section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video, bye bye.